Let's start. So I'm about to keep track on time as well. So but I think that will work out. So this is the third session of the second day, right? Of the Multispecies Heritage Conference. And this is the theme of this session is commodification. And we have 3 papers. Discusses this from different perspectives. And I'm going to repeat some of the facts that the chairs before me has said earlier to make this run a bit smoothly. The session is recorded, and please turn off your camera and microphone during the presentations. Thank you, Brett. I suggest you use the active speaker mode so that you see the one who presents only and not all of the other small black boxes. Which in the active speaker mode you can choose where where we're all together are videos or non-videos, the black boxes. And first we will listen to all the 3 presenters, and then we will get into the Q&A. And I think it's best if we all turn, or the one of us who is comfortable with turning on the video, that we can do that during the Q&A, so we get a feel for the group and the community. Also, I think it's been working out really great writing questions in the chat. So if you would like to do that, I can read the questions. And also, if anyone wants to ask a question, just use the wavy hand reaction, or just wave and I will see if I can see you. And if I don't see you and don't react, shout. Okay, and since this is an online conference, please keep in mind that we're all here together, but we're also in different time zones and different settings. So let's be kind and respectful towards each other. All right. So first up is Thomas Aiello. I hope that I pronounced your name correctly, with a presentation titled Barbecue as Multispecies Heritage, the Semiotics of Restaurant Signs on the American Landscape. Are you ready to share your screen? Great.
I am. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm sorry that I haven't been face-to-face with everyone so far. The morning sessions are very early here in the US, and I've been watching in the dark to so that the animals in the room with me can stay sleeping. But it's a little bit later now. The roads of the United States are lined with a succession of grinning pigs, writes historian Laura Dove, advertising the availability of barbecue in countless restaurants. The signs featuring grinning pigs serve not only as symbols of the American dining experience, but also as symbols of the need to obviate the reality of what human diners are doing to the non-human animals inside. They are a form of caricature as permission, a making of innocent lives as comedy to excuse the behavior of those who might laugh of any malice toward the group that is affected. In this way, pig-themed barbecue signs are imitative of the racist kitsch and cartoons of the Jim Crow era, where the imagery of Little Black Sambo and exaggerated minstrelsy belittled Black lives and customs, and by extension, gave license to whites to treat them as inherently inferior. The semiotics of difference that play out on barbecue signs give similar license to those who eat barbecue in their behavior toward pigs. There is no specific genesis point when barbecue restaurants began fetishizing images of pigs. The near ubiquitous signage began to appear in the post-World War II period, as such restaurants moved out of the segregated residential and business neighborhoods of the small-town South and into the broader mainstream. As Randy Malamud has explained, representations that imaginatively or literally rip animals out of their worlds and resituate them as subalterns or fetishes or resources in our world spell trouble for our fellow species. The individual attitudes humans bring to the sight of animal death tend toward near universal contradiction, largely because of what Jill Jepsen calls the flexibility of language to create and maintain power. The human willingness to engage in various representations of animals depends largely on their assumed edibility, which itself is culturally constructed based on a variety of social and religious factors, or cultural factors. Here you can see Disney's Three Little Pigs from 1934, and you can see in the background that they have an image of their father as sausage. Barbecue restaurant signs take a variety of forms, though they all do functionally similar work in anesthetizing those who see them to the reality of the brutal treatment of the killed animals inside the building behind them. The representation of pigs they present are best understood when divided into 12 distinct categories. First, and most simply, are linguistic representations without accompanying imagery. There is a minimal amount of work done with such nomenclature, but there is work being done. Using the word pig in the names of restaurants that serve the corpses of those animals traduces the line created by traditional nomenclature like pork that serves in a different way to hide the reality of what is being consumed. It is in that line crossing, as in other linguistic tropes like puns, that humor is created, thereby allowing people to laugh at and excuse what might otherwise be considered taboo or morally problematic. Other signs do their work with actual images, the simplest of those being basic non-anthropomorphized representations of pigs. There is in their existence a tacit acknowledgement that a pig is the one to be consumed, but as with using the word pig in a simple linguistic sequence, that acknowledgement is a form of excuse, a way to cross a metaphorical line while knowing that what will happen in the building behind the signage is allowed. Fitting that description, most such imagery includes words on the body of realistically represented pigs, reassuring all that the pig is an object to be consumed rather than a living being. The pig situated on such a sign, then, is simultaneously situated as a sign, as a repository for words or for human hunger. It is the simplest form of semiotic othering. Another simple form of semiotic othering is symbolic, a clear reference to images of pigs without the actual pig, doing the same work with minimal display. The referent is the same, but the coding of the metaphorical line is more subtle. Barbecue signs, of course, also anthropomorphize pigs to further establish the epistemological distance between consumer and consumed. The most basic form comes from giving images of pigs human clothing or facial expressions. In so doing, that signage takes the guilty laugh of co-conspirators and puts it in the forefront, using anthropomorphization to enhance the joke and thereby to abrogate any responsibility for those who might respond to it by entering the restaurant. Such anthropomorphisms, however, are also specialized in very specific ways to do specific kinds of work. Two of those specializations are what I will call here the cool pig and the fancy pig. The cool pig is a common image that presents the pig representative on a given sign as popular and rebellious. The pig representatives in this category typically wear sunglasses, smoke cigars, or both. They sometimes play musical instruments or stand mysteriously in a trench coat. The purpose of such imagery is not only to anthropomorphize the pig, but to do so in a way that makes him someone to admire as a rebel. In this category, not only are potential customers intended to identify with the restaurant's mascot, but they are supposed to associate the pig, and by extension the restaurant, with a sly hitness that would presumably redound to the potential customer. By emphasizing the coolness of the establishment itself, the restaurant is able to make the focus of the imagery the accoutrements that adorn the pig rather than the pig itself, thus deflecting from the reality of the death of such pigs inside. Or perhaps the imagery makes the act of consumption aspirational. The coolness of the mascot makes the acts of killing and consumption cool themselves. That aspirational identity is also clearly present in the fancy pig. In these representations, anthropomorphized pigs are portrayed in tuxedos or top hats. They are depicted as upper class, eliciting a similar response as does the cool pig. Viewer focus is drawn to the clothes and signifiers of wealth rather than to the pig himself, deflecting from the death of the animal and emphasizing instead the incongruity of a pig in fancy clothes, or the aspirational value of associating consuming such animals with upper-class respectability. There could also be in the imagery a revolt against the wealthy, an eat-the-rich attitude that celebrates the roots of working-class barbecue. The image of poor farmers and rural artisans, for example, is also part of the visual nomenclature of barbecue signs, presenting pigs as representations of hillbillies. In this iteration, pigs feature overalls, straw hats, or other manifestations of rural poverty. They are the actual embodiment of the Sambo character, evincing a generic ignorance or simpleness, an evocation of the primitive. At the same time, however, the hillbilly symbol is the counter to the fancy pig, inverting that eat-the-rich motif to revel in those who would do the eating. Along with providing that class-based reverse of portrayals of the wealthy, the hillbilly image also serves, as does the Sambo imagery, as we shall see, to diminish those it intends to mimic by associating them with stupidity, thereby excusing any behavior that might redound negatively to them. While all anthropomorphized pig imagery is by definition fanciful, some of that imagery is more fanciful than others. Some restaurateurs, for example, play on the metaphor of the flying pig. When pigs fly is a common English phrase denoting a structural impossibility dating to at least the 18th century. Flying pigs again emphasize the fanciful to distract from the act of killing. Or they reinforce the notion of impossibility, signifying that if a pig cannot fly, a pig cannot really be a tangible victim of the dining experience. In the same vein, pig representations on barbecue signs also play on other fanciful imagery. Not anthropomorphizations, but what I'll call other morphizations, using pigs in situations even less related to their original constitutions than those of human forms and symbols. A takeout restaurant in Bradenton, Florida, for example, uses an image of a pig automobile as its mascot. One in Grafton, Ohio, uses a pig head in the traditional place of a human skull in the pirate's skull and crossbones. Such visual metaphors only expand the whimsy that comes from flying pig images, pushing pig suffering further from the representation while still including the subject of that suffering in the picture itself. Perhaps even more problematic are the versions of barbecue signage that feature pigs playing a role in the barbecue restaurant process itself. Some of the signs feature pigs as consumers of the barbecue product, as ostensibly consumers of other pigs. In such depictions, anthropomorphized pigs carry silverware or napkins. It is in its way a depiction of cannibalism, wherein a pig prepares to eat another pig. Either the grotesquerie of such symbolism is so hyperbolic that it serves the same purpose of fanciful depictions of pigs who fly, or the caricature places pigs in the roles of the potential human customers, reinforcing the notion that the pigs are in on the activity, thus dismissing any culpability in the human act against the dead pigs inside the restaurant. In an extension of that particular metaphor, many signs also portray pigs as cooks, reversing the metaphor and picturing or intimating pigs barbecuing other pigs. In these images, pigs wear chef's hats or carry cooking utensils. The caricatures do the same work as those of pigs as consumers, either horrifying through hyperbole or excusing every human who enters the restaurant because the pigs are supposedly part of the conceit. The final and most disturbing category of barbecue sign images is the one that openly depicts pigs as the victims of the barbecue process, making a joke of their suffering, reveling in what actually happens to the pigs whose carcasses human customers are preparing to eat. There are two versions of such imagery. The first feature non-anthropomorphized pigs depicted as objects of butchery. The other, even more disturbing version of such signs feature anthropomorphized pigs negotiating in one way or another with the fire that will ultimately barbecue them. Some of them respond with confusion, some with fear, others with relaxed comfort. Those who seem to enjoy the heat are functioning in the same way that cook and consumer categories function, as a means of abrogating the guilt of human consumers. Those who respond with confusion and fear are unique to the set, as the images are overt signposts of the brutality involved in barbecue. But that revelry in cruelty, despite its seeming semiotic differences, acts similar to other caricatures. If such brutality can be mocked, the reasoning goes, then it can't really be brutality. By making a joke of the killing, horror becomes comedy. The cruelty is the point. The signs are exemplars of what Carrie Wolf has called the humanist and speciesist structure of subjectivization, a structure with consequences that spread beyond the parking lots that sit in the shadows of such signs. As long as it is institutionally taken for granted, writes Wolf, that it is all right to systematically exploit and kill non-human animals simply because of their species, then the humanist discourse of species will always be available for use by some humans against other humans as well. To countenance violence against the social other of whatever species, or gender, or race, or class, or sexual difference. Of course, stereotypical images of pigs have existed for centuries, but racist kitsch, the visual terrorism of race that featured caricatured minstrel imagery, dated from at least the 1820s. They appeared regularly in mainstream antebellum American media and continued in the years after the Civil War, corresponding with the rise and popularity of minstrelsy. Racist iconography built off of minstrel show performances were furthered in 1899 when Scottish author Helen Bannerman published The Story of Little Black Sambo. The story of Sambo, as told by Bannerman, is one that diminishes non-human animals to food while diminishing Black children to stereotypes. In the story, Sambo goes for a walk in new clothes, which are eaten off of him one by a series of tigers, before the tigers eventually melt into butter, which becomes the base for a meal for Sambo and his family. It is, in other words, the melding of the barbecue signs and racist kitsch, using caricature to damage respectability and justify the killing and eating of animals. Racist kitsch tends to feature imagery of children like Sambo or of stereotypical slave figures like Uncle Tom, Mammy, and Topsy, the degraded child performer from Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. The images of racist kitsch do not find a direct one-to-one correlation in every category of the images of pig representations on barbecue signs, largely because the viewers of such imagery are not being asked to physically consume the African-American body. Still, the representations look strikingly similar, as they are born of similar epistemic motivations. There are, for example, Jim Crow depictions with large simplistic grins that match those of barbecued pigs. Then there are the primitive images that function as a predecessor for the hillbilly pig imagery. There are presentations of what would equate to pseudo-coolness, including the use of cigars and musical instruments. And there are the fancy images. Then there are the cooks and the servers. There are even victim images, so disturbing and prevalent in barbecue pig signs as well. The images are played for laughs, working through their bigotry to obviate the guilt of those whose bigotry would allow them to laugh in the first place. It is no coincidence, after all, that the early picnics associated with the development of barbecue were mirrored in the ritualized picnics of the lynch party. The images are striking for their racism, for the legacy of the semiotics of Jim Crow, but also for the consistency that they share with the pig imagery on barbecue signs, which has mirrored in its speciesism the bigotry of its racist forebears. The categories, the style, and most importantly, the intent are all the same. The Sambo imagery's ability to both rely on and simultaneously reinforce white supremacy is a demonstration of the same relationship that pig caricature barbecue signs have with human supremacy and its particular form of violence. When we turn an animal sign into a sign relation, Erica Sheen has explained, we enhance its potential for abuse. Such animals become society's unthought, she says, those we cannot see but need to visualize. They are victims of an advertising presence that becomes a simulacrum for the actual lives being lost as a result. The sign relations that create society's unthought line America's highways, doing much the same work that racist Sambo images did for another of society's unthought in previous generations. In his 1952 novel, Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison described the racial trauma of being Black in white society, of being that unthought, no matter the achievement that should have by all rights earned the respect of that thinking. It was the trauma of becoming invisible. The pigs inside American barbecue restaurants are, in similar fashion, made invisible by the caricatured signs in the parking lots that pillory their existence and make it easier for human consumers to forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Wow, I feel a bit, all these images and all the grinning faces. It really strikes me. It strikes me hard. I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. So thank you so much for this.
You.
Very thought-provoking. Okay. Let's move on to the second presenter. That's Paula Akari. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. The title, yes, is Beastly Places, Apprehending and Articulating the Subjective Lives of Commodified Animals. Are you ready?
Yes, I think so. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, great.
Maybe you could move a little bit closer to the speaker, perhaps to the microphone.
Oh, I'm a bit quiet. Okay, sure. Is that better?
Yeah, perhaps. Thanks.
Is it okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my presentation today relates to a 3-year fellowship based at the Centre for Human Animal Studies, where Claire and Brett are, where I've just completed the first year. So the title of the, sorry, I'm just working out the different things. Okay. Oh, I see. Oh gosh, so I lose all my notes. I didn't realize I'd lose all my notes from each thing. I'm sorry. Does the next person want to go first, and I'll try and sort my notes out in the meantime? I'm really sorry about this. I didn't know my notes would disappear when I switched slides.
Yeah, could you do that, Jess and Saya and Mary? Or could you perhaps go first? Are you?
I'm so sorry about that.
Paula, if you could start by not sharing your screen. So that we can see each other. Hi. Is that possible to move on and take the last presenter as a second? So that is Jess Hooper and Harry Leibart. That's comprised by visual artists Saya Kassinen and Mary Linna. If you're ready.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, perfect. So you are presenting how to become an embodied perspective of animal commodification. And just take your time and a deep breath and go when you're ready.
Okay, we just need to know if Jess is present.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Good to hear that you're here.
All right, nice.
So I am a bit confused here where I should look. Where should I look? Because we have a sharing computer, the screen from one computer. I will look here. Okay. Nice to meet you all online. So as was presented, our paper is a form of a video actually, and it was called How to Become an Embodied Perspective of Animal Commodification. So I will shortly just start by presenting Harry Leibart. So Harry Leibart is a collaboration between me, my name is Meri Linna.
And I'm Saija Kassinen.
So we have been working together since 2008, and we are visual artists. And we are working on a 3-year-long artistic research project at the moment. And this project is called the Collective Perversion Proposal for Revaluation. And this is a project that investigates the societal implication of using fresh water in the toilet bowl. So in this project, we also focus quite a lot on human attitudes, and especially human attitudes towards bodily functions. So this is how we came across something, a phenomena or a product, if you would like to call it that, civet coffee. And in order to understand what this is better, we wanted to look into the ethnographical approach, if there would be such a thing on civet coffee. And this is how we came in contact with Jess Hooper.
Hi, can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so yes, so I'm an anthrozoology PhD student at the University of Exeter. I am in I've just come into my 2nd year, but I'm doing it part-time, so it's a 7-year course. I am doing a multi-species ethnography of human-animal interactions in the Anthropocene. So I'm actually using the Asian palm civet and its relatives, so all civet species, kind of as a protagonist, because it's a relatively poorly known species, both in the biological sciences and also the social sciences. So I'm looking at this unknown, or relatively unknown species and how it's interacting with humans in different contexts. So I'm looking at this from a capitalist kind of perspective, looking at civet coffee, the exotic pet trade and zoo specimens as well. And I'm really evaluating the philosophy behind those interactions. So yeah, I'm very much interested in breaking down certain dualisms. So the human-animal divide, nature versus nurture, qualitative versus quantitative. And in doing so, I was looking for a interdisciplinary approach to my research. So when Meri and Saija approached me, it was the perfect opportunity. And I'll just let them talk now a little bit about the video that we'll be showing you today.
Okay, so so today we are presenting our first collaboration that is in form of a video at the moment that we have created together. And this video has been made especially to this conference. And I want to point out that this is not yet in a form of an artwork, but we will continue developing our common work after this. We are planning to make academic articles as well as an artwork in the future. When we're showing the video, if the video images appear a bit grayish, it's a problem in the Zoom, not in the video itself. So I think Meri will put the video on. I hope you all enjoy it, and let's talk after that a bit more.
So if I could just ask some of you to show a thumbs up once the audio starts. So in the beginning, there's a bit of silence, maybe like 20 seconds or something. But then when you hear the audio, that you just make sure that we can also know that there's no problem. Thank you. The video is about 12 to 13 minutes, something like that.
The palm civet is a mostly nocturnal mammal living in tropical forests in South Asia. Civets are omnivores in the wild, but mainly feed on fruits. The feces of the palm civet is the centerpiece of the particular high-end global civet coffee trade. The civet coffee derives from beans that have been eaten by and passed through the digestive tract of a palm civet. This coffee is produced by parting the semi-digested bean from the dried scat, after which the intact beans are cleaned, dried, and roasted. The tradition of brewing civet coffee from beans gathered in the wild is found in several regions across southern Asia, and the tales of how it was first discovered and came into cultural use has local variations. The common narrative states that it coincided with Dutch colonialism, when large-scale imported monocrop coffee plantations were enforced on the Indonesian islands. Today, civet coffee is exported and marketed through the traditional narrative of wild collection. Yet there is no reliable certification of wild sourcing, and government permits are issued for mass caged production.
If I would meet palm civet and see her, her eyes with which she would be looking back at me, her mouth, tongue, throat, stomach, intestine, gut flora, the digestive tract. Could I gain knowledge through our shared biological processes?
I see a vast landscape on top of the hillside. The brisk air fills my lungs while I look at a valley that lingers below. The plantation is before me. Through straight rows, it is easy to navigate between the bushes. Like pearls, the red cherries shine in contrast to the deep green leaves. I instinctively choose one. I hold it between my fingers. It feels firm and the peel is glossy. I put it in my mouth. My teeth pierces the skin. It is bitter. Under the bitterness, the flesh is revealed. Sweet, but not much compared to the size of the seeds nesting inside. The coffee beans.
I have a strong image of you in my mind. In the middle of the night, solitary, eating juicy cherries and avoiding humans who used to call you a thief before your shit could be translated into money.
This is how global commodity chains brought it to me, and I followed it to you.
I am a stranger in this place, the other, knowing too little of the lives lived here. Coffee does not grow where I'm from, so I took the risk, and I do this as cautiously as possible, not to catch the attention. I'm afraid of offending them and their culture through my research methods. I'm afraid to be misunderstood as an extremist. What would they say if they knew that I came all the way here across half of the planet, disguised as a tourist, to become closer with you?
I collect the cherries one by one into a container that I borrowed from the plantation owner, and I return to my hiding place. There I start selecting, cleaning, peeling, counting everything that goes in to know how much to expect to come out. For me, this is now an experiment. I'm analytical, calculative, and a bit concerned if I will be able to digest this.
One, two. Three, 4, 5. Sweat drops are forming on my upper lip. My intestine seems like a pearl necklace. Resistance. Forcing. I think of you. Your heritage commodified. Days are passing while we continue counting and eating. This house feels like a cage. I see you. We pace back and forth between where we eat and where we shit.
The human is a mostly diurnal mammal, living in various climates, inhabiting all temperate continents. The human is an omnivore, producing most of her food through agricultural practices. Human feces is a species-specific taboo in many cultures, while other animals' excrements are utilized as materials or for producing a wide range of products, civet coffee being one of them. It is the digestive enzymes and encounters with microbiomes which alter the bean's physical structure, creating a distinctive taste to the brewed coffee. In the footage that you are watching, we employ the human gut flora to replace that of the civet, in an attempt to shed light on human attitudes and to embody understanding of the process of civet coffee, fecal commodification, and the civet. Our experiment resulted in 80 grams of physically created human coffee beans. The production process technically paralleled the production of civet coffee by separating the semi-digested beans from the scat, after which the intact beans were cleaned and dried. Civet coffee has been publicised by celebrities and public figures. Stephen Fry bought a packet for Prince Charles, it appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and it was featured in the film The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson. How would human coffee be promoted, and by who? For civet coffee, false claims of less than 127 kilograms availability per year keeps the prices and rarity status high. Not only has consumer demand increased export, civet coffee tourism has emerged at curated sites. Here the civet is placed on display in cages as a spectacle within showroom gardens which are promoted as agro-tourism. Introducing human coffee for market production may liberate the civet from industrial cages, but it does require us to reflect on the ethical implications of exchanging one being for another. When utilising living beings for such an experiment, one must form conclusions with delicacy. We need to carefully watch our arguments not to unintentionally traverse racist ideologies. While global consensus states that enslaving humans is wrong, the human-animal binary persists. Consumptionism pushes the civet to transgress, from wild animal towards biomechanical mouth-to-anus production line. Would we employ the same industrial monotony to our own species, to exchange the freedom of our own gut in order to enhance our taste buds? For now, our product, unmarketed and unsold, waiting in the stage of unroasted beans, is the heritage of knowledge, an understanding of shared biological vulnerabilities to exploitation.
Okay, so that was our interpretation of civet coffee and the fecal commodification process. We're really interested to use this space and this conference as a forum for to inform our own work going forward. So yeah, we're very much interested in the different themes that might come from discussions and questions, and it's definitely something that we will be using and kind of reflecting on going forward. Like we said before, we plan on having maybe several more chapters. We may continue with the video. We are also planning on having the exhibition in 2022, I think it is, and we will also be working on some academic papers. So as much feedback as possible, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Jess, Saya, and Mary. I really enjoyed how you took on the forced labor of the civet through your own bodies. and also the fact that we didn't see a single civet in the video. Also very much looking forward to the discussions afterwards. So thank you so much for this presentation. And let's move on to Paula. How is your notes going? Have you sorted it out?
Yes, I have, and I really appreciate it, Jess, Mary, and Seja. Thank you for stepping in. I really appreciate that while I got sorted.
Perfect. So the third presenter then, Paula Akari again, Beastly Places, Apprehending and Articulating the Subjective Lives of Commodified Animals. And whenever you are ready.
So are you seeing the presentation? Yes.
Now I see your notes.
Oh, okay. Let's change that again. Is that better?
Now I see the first slide.
Okay, all right. I'll get there, everyone. Sorry.
Mm.
Right.
Okay, and now I see the second slide. So now I guess you're on the right track.
I figured I wouldn't repeat the first bit. So. Yeah, so the whole project is part of this fellowship that's on the visual consumption of animals, challenging persistent binaries. So the project, this fellowship aligns with my broader interest in expanding understandings of animal exploitation to encompass routine uses understood as largely benign, if not benevolent. So physical harm is only one dimension of oppression, and in particular, I want to highlight the ontological violence done to commodified animals that's rarely considered in theorizations concerned with relations, entanglements, and moments of interaction. So ontological violence is conceived as a phenomenological approach to animals' culturally severed and compromised lives. It resonates at an individual level with Anne Cudd's psychic harm, and at a species level with Deborah Bird Rose's concept of double death. And Zipporah Weisberg is the one that's discussed ontological violence. She describes it as the distortion of the phenomenological basis of animals' existence, especially their perceptual experience and expression of subject. As part of that, my emphasis is also on the negative spaces shaped by these interactions, because it's these spaces that constitute the majority of the animal's lived experience outside moments of interaction. It's also on the processes of derelation that most of these animals experience several times in their life. And by that, I mean the transitory nature of what are interpreted as meaningful interactions from a human perspective, as the animals passed on from one owner to the next and from one function to another, as they proceed down the commodity chain of their life. So in this way, relations are repeatedly undone, derelating or disentangling, including from their own communities and ecologies, and the animals constantly being ontologically and reconstructed in the process. So my project scope's narrowed to what I call spectacularized animals, those whose uses center on their visual appeal. So for this project, this includes animals that are part of zoos, racing events, and agricultural shows. It could also include circuses and, outside the UK, rodeos, bull riding, bullfighting, urban street races, parades, and other events. So there's four main components of data collection: a focus on the beastly spaces of these sites and events, their material, spatial, and temporal arrangements, tracking individual animals over time, interviews with visitors to explore the role these practices serve in their lives and how they make sense of the animals. Multisensory elements are also factored into each of these three, so sight, sound, smells, and tactile elements. And finally, an exploration of countersites or heterotopia, where the normalized social order is disrupted. So today I'm giving a brief account of some elements of components 1 and 2 to show how I'm approaching the construction of a sort of animal biography using different kinds of information. I've completed 35 interviews so far, but I haven't started analysing these yet. First, though, I want to briefly highlight a couple of common concerns with multi-species research regarding the extent to which humans or animals are the centre of analysis, and more critically, whether animal categories, for example, as food, pets, etc., are problematized or accepted as already done. So Hamilton and Taylor, in their book, note that even in animal-focused disciplines, animal subjectivity tends to be marginalized or entirely absent. Animals are seen as adjuncts to us in our lives instead of having lives in their own right. So multi-species studies can thus become just another way to understand the human. Dinker and Peterson similarly warn new methods that gloss over asymmetric human-animal power relations may constitute new instantiations of human narcissism and desire for knowledge rather than formations of genuinely ethical relations. Susan Lee Starr in the 60s proposes it's both more analytically interesting and politically just to begin with the question cui bono than with a celebration of the fact of human-non-human mingling, that is, who benefits. So this project was designed from the outset with the aim of tilting the scales more decisively towards the animals' perspectives and moving humans to the background. Methodologically, it draws on observation, interviews, multi-species ethnography, and other disciplines such as ethology, zoology, genomics, veterinary studies, and other secondary sources. It also borrows a technique from Jason Hribal in his book on animal resistance, where the animals are the central named subjects and humans are known only as trainer, keeper, owner, various players that move in and out of the animals' lives. So with the remaining time, I'll give a brief picture of the lives of just two animals I've been following. So this is Ludo. He's what we call a mandrill. He's 11 years old. He was born in Chester Zoo, which is commonly known as the best zoo in the UK and listed in the top 15 in the world. He's one of 29 offspring fathered by JC, the group's former alpha male. Most of Ludo's siblings have been transferred to other zoos across Europe and the US. His father was born in the Czech Republic and brought to Chester in '97 through Ravensden Zoological Company, a well-known animal commercial clearinghouse for the exchange of surplus livestock between zoos. JC died at Chester Zoo 2 years ago, aged 26, having spent 21 years at the zoo. In the 3 consecutive days I spent watching Ludo, he was contained in a small enclosure with one female, adjacent to one about 3 times the size, containing 12 to 15 mandrills and with outdoor access. Ludo and his companion did not have outdoor access. I asked the zoo why these two were separated and how long it would be for. I was told they were waiting for a visit from the vet team for a routine health check and that separation makes this check smoother and safer for the zoo team and less stressful for the animals. I also asked where they slept, wondering if that would be when Ludo got outside access. I was told they were kept inside overnight, so for at least 3 days, 24/7, Ludo was confined in the same space with no outside access. I was suspicious of the reasons given for this and returned to the zoo 3 weeks later, and he was still there, this time with 3 females. Again, he was there the whole day. Ludo's days were routine and repetitive. The mandrills are fed around 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. every day. He's locked in a top section of the cage for part of this, for around 20 minutes, perhaps for the higher value food items. Afterwards, he's allowed back to forage for smaller bits of food with his companions. Outside of feeding, Ludo spent the majority of his time focused on the mandrills in the adjacent cage. He paced the fence line repeatedly, and this would often escalate to agitated circuits, jumping up and hitting the window as he went past to break or gain momentum. He would frequently greet those in the other enclosure, and attempts would be made to groom each other, but they'd quickly give up because they couldn't get their fingers or teeth through the small holes of the metal fencing. 2 entries from one day of my field notes read, at 10:15, Ludo doing the same pacing up and down the fence side, perches on the second tier corner looking across to the other cage, greeting grimace at female on other side. When watching the others go outside, he gets especially agitated, running up and down the side now about 6 times, bouncing off the viewing glass, a couple of loud screeches. This generates laughter from visitors. Still pacing, he's running up and down 2 to 3 times, back up on the corner level, inspects something in his hand while sitting looking over. 10:30, finally stops pacing, sitting on the very top of the pole, grooming. At 1 p.m. the same day, at the fence line again, some absent foraging but mainly pacing, faster when female on the other side comes near, circling and pacing, interspaced with a faster circuit, then up and down the fence line again. Watching the others at the exit gets him more agitated. He climbs up the walls to the top of the cage on top of the pole for about a minute, then down the cage side, grinning and pawing at the cage, pacing slowly, gets really agitated, does a fast round back to the fence line, and people laugh. The 3 days unfold in a similar way. Ludo's primary environment is one of hard edges and corners, cold metal, concrete walls and floors, impenetrable fencing, and no other living creatures except when or if he gets outside. The loose floor covering is just a few inches deep, and they quickly reach concrete when they're foraging for food. At various times during the day, visitors whistle to attract his attention for pictures, tap on the glass, coo at him, reach out, call yoo-hoo, and wave if he looks over. I noticed the number of times visitors narrated their encounters to make it personal. He's coming over to see us. It came to say hello to you. Each interaction lasted 30 seconds on average, perhaps a minute, before people moved on, and are just one of hundreds or thousands that Ludo faces every day. What struck me most about the time spent watching him was a sense of restlessness, contained energy, and limited options. He spent at least 72 straight hours in that cage and must know every inch of it, compared to the 50 square meters occupied by a single troop in the wild. As for Ludo's future, he was born into the European Endangered Species Breeding Programme. As long as he fulfills his purpose, like his father, he will remain at Chester Zoo for the rest of his life, except when requested by another zoo for breeding. This will involve him being flown in a crate to wherever he's needed. It's worth noting that between 3,000 and 5,000 healthy animals are culled every year under these programs just within the European network, which has 340 zoo members. There are over 10,000 zoos in the world, and only a small proportion of these are licensed. Ludo contributes to the attraction value of Chester Zoo and to a breeding program whose last evidence of a wild release is from 2002. Given his upbringing, he will not be part of any release program. He's primarily a source of genes and a visual spectacle, just one among many representatives of the species mandrill and the genus Mandrillus, noted for their colorful markings, large teeth, and being the largest monkey in the world. I'll be checking on Ludo at least another 4 times during the project. Next is Luftin Blanco. He was born in 2009 in Ireland. At least 25,000 greyhound puppies are registered every year in the British Isles, and at 5 months old, they're moved to their kennel, usually outdoors and with one other dog, their kennel mate. This becomes their home while they train. Luftin started racing at 20 months, and in 2 years he ran 71 races at 13 different tracks across England and Ireland. That's 2 to 3 races a month. He won 34 of those, a win rate of 47%, which is high by industry standards. In between these highly spectacular moments, which make up about 10% of a greyhound's life, the industry code of practice states the minimum daily requirement for human contact is 30 minutes, and the minimum daily exercise is 2 15-minute walks. That's over 23 hours of the day that Luftin Blanco is legally permitted to be kennelled. On race days, depending on the location, he may travel in a van for up to 4 hours. And apart from toilet breaks, pre and post race checks, and the race itself, which lasts about 15 to 60 seconds, he would spend most of the time in a van or trackside kennel until it's time to travel back to his own. Depending on the track, he would have to negotiate different conditions. The degree of bend on tracks varies, and the tighter bends cause more leg injuries and collisions. The metal traps are something he would have got used to from a young age, but irresponsible or more purposeful trackside practices place dogs in the wrong trap so that they set off in their least favorite position and risk injury and collision as they jostle to find their spot. Luftin Blanco received high praise for his achievements. He was described as a triple category 1 winner and dubbed Super Blanco. He made his UK owners happy too. He had 1 owner and 1 trainer, a big name in the industry. Forum threads indicate he was retired after his last race in October 2013. Records indicate he was crowded by other dogs during this race. He also had problems in his previous 3 races following a solid run of 4 firsts. It's highly likely he sustained an injury which made him no longer viable as a racer. And he's now listed on the database as being owned by one of the largest studs in Ireland. It was Caged Northwest, the UK's leading advocacy group for greyhounds, who tracked down Luftin Blanco in China. So far, they've traced 54 Irish and UK greyhounds to operations there, many of whom were revered during their careers. I've also traced the whereabouts of Luftin's litter mates to determine whether his trajectory was typical or not. So from his 5 siblings, they all stopped racing at just over 3 years old. None of them were used for breeding, and I couldn't find any further information about them. A 2019 investigation by Ireland's biggest broadcasting network found that 6,000 greyhounds were slaughtered in 2017 alone for poor performance. And in one of Blanco's litters, of the 11 dogs, 1 was euthanized, 3 are untraceable, 2 still racing, 2 adopted, 1 still up for adoption, and 2 are breeding. So my research is very much in the early stages, and there's still a lot of gaps to be filled in these animal stories. But the key aims I've had with this are to emphasize the animal's individuality as opposed to the species or group, and the impacts of human decisions on their lives. Second, to challenge understandings of human-animal relations and entanglements, noting that these are often mere moments of strategic interaction. These animals' lives are characterized more by the negative spaces of non-relating, non-interaction with humans and other species, and also derelation, where any kind of established relation is undone and where they're often ontologically de-reconstructed. Third, to widen understandings of what constitutes animal exploitation to encompass the whole animal industrial complex and its interconnected industries. Single issues need to be conceived through the lens of animal oppression rather than being limited to one industry, one category of animals, or even one practice. As part of that, to highlight the techniques of oppression common across all animal uses. Every animal experiences physical, psychological, and also ontological violence through the techniques used to limit and control their life, including capture, containment, training, control and coercion, separation and isolation, trafficking and trading, breeding and killing. Currently, extreme suffering is the key measure by which their situation is deemed worthy of attention, and I suggest this approach does not account for ontological violence and is even doing a disservice to the cause of animal liberation. So with all this in mind, I think it's important for multi-species research to be reflexive in terms of who is being positioned as the teleological center of an animal's life, the animal or humans. And with that, a star inquired, cui bono, or who benefits? Thank you very much. So let's stop sharing now.
Thank you so much for this, Paula. Really disturbing images of Ludo, and also like hearing you read your notes from the site, on site, describing how he moves in the cage and how the people react. I think that was really, yeah, it was like heartbreaking actually. So thank you for this pain and a really lovely presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thank you all presenters. We have 25 minutes for questions and discussions. And if everyone who feels comfortable with that can turn on their cameras, that would be great so we can see all of you. I can see if you have any questions, write them in the chat or raise your hand and I will try to moderate this. So Jess is asking, and I guess perhaps it's for Paula then. Yeah. What about positive reinforcement training, as we often employ with companion animals to build trust and enhance human-animal bonds? Is this still a form of violence?
Yes, thanks, Jess. I think it's important to always step back and acknowledge the broader circumstances of the relation. Of course, many of us have companion animals and beings that we've rescued or have taken in, but they come from broader situations that are defined by the logic of sovereignty, as Dinesh Wadiwal would describe it. And regardless of the beneficial relationships we can establish, they're still underpinned by those logics, these animals wouldn't be in that position if it wasn't for the different values and varying values that we attach to them, and they're always at the mercy of what we decide to do. Is how I would put that. Yeah. So even if our relationships with our individuals are wonderful, those animals are lucky. It's not a rule that they get treated like that. It's just chance, complete chance for them. I don't know if any of the others want to comment on that.
Yeah, maybe I can comment. I'm just thinking about something. Maybe some of you know James French. He teaches the trust technique, and he's also someone very much involved with horses. And he would say that he's very keen about this word training. He avoids it. He never talks about training, but about teaching, which is a different position. And maybe this positive reinforcement, at least it's about forced behavior sometimes. And I think it's the wrong impression with the animals that we live together with. Yeah.
Zoe, you would like to give a comment?
Yes, just quickly about the term positive reinforcement. Technically, pinching a dog's ear and then releasing when the dog exhibits a behavior is considered positive reinforcement and is allowed by most, dog training associations. Especially, I'm thinking about France because that's where I'm from. So when you see, dog companies or companies like that say we only use positive reinforcement, the, cessation of pain is considered a form of positive reinforcement. So there is no positive reinforcement without the possibility to inflict pain or discomfort. So, withholding toys and then giving toys is also considered a form of positive reinforcement, but you can't reward with toys unless you have removed them before. So of course I do believe that the concept, the way we conceive of positive reinforcement is very different from the way it is practiced sometimes.
That's a really interesting point, because yeah, I mean, we would actually describe as far as I understand it, I would describe what you've just said as positive punishment, which is something that I would never ever condone, regardless of the animal, whether it's in a zoo or as a pet or anything like that. It's just, yeah, I find it interesting. I'm reading a book at the moment, Zoopolis, and they really explore like the politics of that. And I think language and semiotics is so important. And I like the idea of getting away from the idea or the concept of training and actually learning and cooperation. And that voluntary behaviors, I think, is really, really positive. But I think we do have a lot to work on, because yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit apprehensive about placing things into these very set, it's wrong or it's right, and there's way more nuances with the ways that we interact with animals, and I think we've all agreed on that so far. So yeah, it's really interesting though.
Is there any other questions? So I have a question for Jess and Cyan, Mary, and like this, I really like this mouth to anus industrial line, which is really interesting. Is there any other animals, humans, that work in the industrial line of mouth to anus?
I would think maybe in the making of argan oil, I think that's the name of it. There is used goat, like some other kind of, are they seeds or something, which passes through the digestive tract of goats.
And also there is another coffee brand that is Ivory Coffee that has passed through an elephant gut. So there is some some other products also.
And this ivory coffee is created by a former civet coffee trader who found that industry so repulsive that he wanted to find like an ethical version of such product. So that's why he then started this business in Thailand instead, if I understood correctly, where the elephants are then utilized in this manner. They are said to be roaming in some kind of reserve freely, and then the beans are picked from their feces in the wild. That's what they say. But we contacted him, but he didn't. When we told him what we want to do or what we wanted to come there and find out, he never answered us back. It's a year ago that we last heard.
All right, thank you. Thomas, there is a question for you in the chat. It's whether if you could unpack a bit more about the co-production of breed and race through this linkage explored. Do you understand the question, or should it's Esther who asks the question?
Sure. No, right. There are a lot of similarities that go beyond just signage and things like that. Kind of the core study of that was Marjorie Spiegel's The Dreaded Comparison, which came out in the early 90s, but that has since been pushed back on quite a bit. I would argue that breeding doesn't work as analogous as much as some other things would, simply because slave breeding and breeding when it came to race wasn't systematized. While it certainly happened, it wasn't state regulated, it wasn't state mandated, it wasn't causing the deaths of billions every year, it wasn't doing the same kinds of work that animal breeding does. Animal breeding is designed to create death, whereas slave breeding, when it happened, was not systematized, and it was designed to create longer life. There might be a closer correlation if we're thinking about human breeding to eugenics movements in various countries that tried to selectively breed humans in the same way that we selectively breed animals for certain traits. But more broadly speaking, the correlation between speciesism and racism, there are a lot of correlations. There is a growing literature right now on race and animality that is really trying to push back on the original context of Marjorie Spiegel, to put those in a modern context and to tie the kinds of things that we do to animals with the way that the Black population is, at least in the United States, is treated now, as opposed to comparing modern animal techniques to the way we used to do slavery, which tends to essentialize the Black population and kind of animalize them in a way that they obviously do not appreciate. But the correlation is there. There are great new books by people like Af Ko or Lindgren Johnson, Benedict Beauceron, who have kind of made the study of the use of animals in civil rights protests versus the rate of Black veganism. And so there are a lot of racial analogies being used in the modern scholarship that don't necessarily draw on that pre-1865 model. Of course, there is no breeding model for when the blackface images that I showed were there, because those are predominantly happening in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which puts that in the age of the early Jim Crow period, when segregation in the United States just starts.
Thank you, Tom. I'm really interested in this, and I'm going to explore the linkage further because my project pertains to Great Plains, Dakota, and Lakota, and kind of the signification links with the Indian horse, so-called Indian horse. And so your study provides a point of contrast where the pig and the minstrel are commodified very differently as objects of desire, entertainment, or consumption. Yeah, and just, it's a similar period, pre-1862, 1865, like what enclosures are the humans and animals being subject to at this point? And it's just I'm fascinated by
right. I mean, there's a reason why in constant references in abolitionism before 1865 and then in civil rights work from the late 19th century on, there's a constant refrain that activists start saying that we're being treated like an animal. I mean, there's a reason why they keep going back to that narrative, because they saw it too. I mean, they very much saw, they didn't care as much about the animal, obviously, but they very much saw their situation as being similar to that, as the way that we're treating animals. I would suggest for the Indian Horse Project, Beauceron's book called Afro Dog is very much about the way dogs are coded racially, and how similar that is to the Black experience in the Caribbean in particular. But he does a lot of that same kind of work that probably would correspond quite well to the way we use even human epithet names to describe various species of animal, to kind of make that work the other way.
Thank you, Tom. So we have some more questions in the chat now. It's from Megan to Jess and Harry Leibart. Is it possible to hear more about the situationality, sorry, this word, of the people who are involved in the manufacturing of civet feces? You mentioned a plantation owner, and we saw hands at the beginning of the video. I'm interested if you explore the social dynamics involved in the commodification of animal bodies or waste system as being bound up with the commodification of human bodies as labor.
I can just respond very fast. Like, I just realized we forgot something in the video, which we were talking about during the production of it, that we were supposed to write in the end that no civets has been harmed during the production of this video, which would have been very essential. It's, sorry?
Bodies. Yeah, civet bodies.
Civets, yeah. Because there is like, they are not portrayed in this video or their feces for a reason, like because we wanted to put the focus on the actions of the humans in that case. So if somebody confused the hands being handling feces of civets, that's just what I'm trying to say. There was no civet feces portrayed in this video. And the plantation owner, which is mentioned, he also does not keep civets. So there has been no civet involvement in the making of this video.
I guess I can add to that as well a little bit with, so at the moment I'm looking into the logistics of creating Kopi Luwak or civet coffee. And the reason it's got this really high value to it is because it's considered to be a very rare commodity. Only 127 kilograms of it are available a year. Of course, that's absolute rubbish. It's available across the entire world. But unfortunately, there's absolutely no way to test whether it's gone through the digestive tract of a civet that is in a cage or a civet that is in the wild. And the certification schemes are all, don't get me started. So it's a really, really big problem. But the difficulty is as well is that these are people's livelihoods we're talking about. So one of the questions we wanted to kind of posit with this video is, it's one thing to take the narrative and embody how the animal perceives it. And that's a really important thing to do when the animal is the one that's kind of being left out of the story. But at the same time, it's really important that I think we talked about approaching the ethics of it with delicacy, because we were saying, well, would we be able to completely replace this product with humans, given there's humans all over the world? And then we were thinking, well, no, because humans are one of the most common species on the planet. If they're the most common species on the planet, then they're not a rare commodity. We were playing around with the idea of, well, how much coffee would we all be producing if it was all humans? But then equally, it's like, well, if we can't have humans because they're not rare, would we have to have a rare human? And then we end up going down this really racial trajectory where it's, do we only find these rare communities of humans? What is rare and why does it even matter? And this is something that I'd like to come back to. Yesterday, it was brought up in one of the presentations, this idea of classifying species. And the civet is what I call a liminal being. So it doesn't fit into species classifications. There's been so many different species of civets that no longer exist because, oh, wait, no, it doesn't quite fit into this boundary. So we'll give it another name. And then they do DNA tests. It's like, oh, actually, it's kind of this one instead. And eventually, I mean, there's papers to now say that the species they thought existed were actually different species to begin with. So that's another reason we didn't really want to have the civet represented in the video at all. It's about giving agency to a different type of narrative. And I'm, in my own research, I'm kind of struggling a little bit with the idea of, do I actually put an image of a civet into my research at all? Because they are liminal, they're nocturnal, we shouldn't really be seeing them. But I've gone off on a tangent, so I'll hand over to someone else.
Thanks, Jess. There's actually a question for you next, from you next in the chat for Tom and Paula. Given the kitsch nature of the barbecue signs, do you think zoo signage could also be considered as representing animals in poor taste? I often found the depiction of wild animals in the natural habitat next to a captive ambassador to be an uncomfortable contrast.
Well, I'll go quickly first, and I'll just say, yes, absolutely. I mean, the vast majority of zoos play largely to an adolescent audience, and they use cartoon characters of happy animals. And you go to a zoo as a kid because you like animals. You know, it's essentially taking a group of people who would otherwise be predisposed to supporting animals and giving them that quote unquote product in a very, very captive space. It just has a fancy wrapping on it that makes them think that they're doing something that is pro-animal. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally agree. They're I think, as I try to hit in the presentation, they're just a representation of genus and species. The individuals effectively erased in a similar way to the living individuals erased in the depictions of the pig. You know, Carol Adams' absent referent is probably applicable as well, but also. It's a whole system that the zoos carefully constructed. They're places of education. They didn't used to be. They've constructed that discourse of them as places of education. So they used to be places of display and even of humans, as we probably all know. So they've repackaged themselves in this very conservation education thing, sort of branding, but actually when you're there, where the individual animals have come from is never told, and I've asked zoo visitors and they haven't even thought about it, where any of the individuals have come from, and even the fact that they're captive bred, I think it's not really in people's minds. That whole industrial side of it is kept invisible, really, through, I guess, through that signage as well. The signage reinforces the wildness, the habitat, the animality of these kind of very unwild, kind of deconstructed animals.
I really like what you said there about the industrialization and how it's hidden. And I think that goes back to, I think it was Megan's question with the civet coffee. Civet coffee is actually produced in what Singh describes as out of the way places. And they're produced in extremely small scale farms. So you can get a permit from your local council. You can then have, I think it's up to 10 civets. They have to be of a specific species because, say, binturong, for example, are listed as in decline. So they're not allowed to be taken from the wild. It's cheaper to get a civet from the wild. It's about £10 compared to get one that's been captive bred. Even though they are prolifically captive bred for the pet trade, they're sold for hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So actually it's a really, really cheap incentive to go into the wild and get them. But people don't see where the kopi luwak is being produced. And there's this idea that it's synonymous with nature and the wild and exotic. And, you know, we're helping these indigenous communities by going out and picking the feces off the floor. It's like, how dehumanizing is that already? And then actually that's not what's happening. It's these industrial practices that are happening in people's basements and in people's garages. And no one sees it. And it's very hard to document because it's happening all over Indonesia, but it's not in any places that are in public view. It's like expecting to know what's in the garage of every single town in England. Like we're not going to see it. And I think a lot of industry and the commodifying of bodies happens behind these closed doors in very normal neighborhoods, and you just wouldn't expect it.
I agree.
Okay, so there is a lot of questions popping up here. Shoshana asks if about the plans for developing the documentary. If in light of yesterday's presentations on the work of microbes, if Jess and Harry have given thought to the more than human commodification of the internal microorganisms in this process, and perhaps to even showing the journey of the bean and the agency of these others.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We were just having a brief on the break, and I was saying, oh, I hope somebody asked this question. So thank you. I think it would be wonderful to do that. And I mean, we mention it just with one word, that there is this microflora, but I think for this project, we didn't really know yet how to do that, and how it could, like, how could all of these multi-species interactions be there at the same time without getting astray from the topic of this project, which was already quite dense and difficult and controversial in a way in which we show it, maybe by using human feces and things like this, which is a taboo in many places. So I would be really happy if somebody has any idea of this. Please contact us. Like even after this, we would be more than happy to understand this. And also in a broader sense, in our own project that we work on, we are looking into this in different ways.
That's why I was wondering about the journey of the bean. Like if you were able to show that in, I don't know enough about medical science, but you know, some kind of internal camera that could show those different things working all together. Yeah, I was thinking I would like to see that is more the take on that. Oops.
Okay, so next question is for Tom. Could you say something about the correlation between speciesism and sexism in relation to one of your images depicting a pig in a sexy attire?
Yes, that is one of the categories I kind of left out for time, but yes, absolutely. Of course, the idea of consuming meat and consuming the female body have gone together for a very long time. Added to that, barbecue in the United States is considered a particularly masculine thing to eat. And so making the images as sultry as possible goes along with that. The racial correlation there, of course, is the fact that the vast majority of all interracial contact prior to the 1870s was the result of white guys raping slave women. It is what has created the quote unquote melting pot of the United States. It's all built on rape. And so there is a dual correlation there of this kind of masculine taking and the making of different and exotic into something sexual and takeable by either humans in one category or white men in the other.
Thank you. So I've been trying to formulate a question in my head, or there is something that I find that you have somehow in common. Not only the theme of this panel, but also something about invisibility, trying to work against or towards that. For example, Paula, you mentioned this idea of animals in the zoo working against working towards seeing them as individuals and not representations of a species, because that's making visible, talking about individuals in the zoos as individuals and not representations of species. And Thomas, you talked about how they are visible in the signs but completely invisible, and someone mentioned the absent referent, for example. And you, Jess, and Harry Leibart crew, you also work with the invisible civet, but it's completely visible because you talk about it and you try to mimic the enforced labor. So I don't know if you could end this session perhaps by just talk a bit about how you think about the invisible and visible within your work.
So could I just,
if that makes sense to you?
Just before the speakers do respond, could I ask, and I'm terribly sorry to be the voice of doom here, but could I ask you to keep your responses quite brief so that we can keep the time, because we were due to go on a break a few minutes ago. I just want to make sure that everybody does have, just for everybody's health and well-being, that people do have time away from the screen, because we still have a panel left to go. But obviously, if people do want to respond as speakers, I don't want to stop anybody responding to that last question, but if you could be very brief, please, I think that'd be great, so we can keep to time, or near enough anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Claire, for keeping track of me. And I suggest that we just say thank you so much for the panelists, give them a warm applaud, and then those who want to stay and discuss the invisible, visible can stay, and others can go for a coffee. Yes? Thank you so much.